Hi, we're here for chapter 6 of Bloom. And we're done, Anaya said. She'd hit send, and the last of the yearbook files were on their way to the printer. It was after school on Monday, and she and Teresa had stayed late to make their deadline. With the pollen still flying outside, half the kids and teachers had been absent today. Crumbled tissues littered the hallways and overflowed the garbage bins. Finding toilet paper in the washrooms, rare at the best of times, was now impossible. Snuffling, coughing kids slumped around the halls like zombies. Another year of precious memories, Teresa said sarcastically, blowing her nose yet again. Thanks for doing those last layouts. My eyes were literally streaming. You're way better with the computer anyway. You saved the day. No problem, said Anaya. I woke up with my eyes glued shut, Teresa said. Same, said Fleetwood, who was slumped in a chair waiting for them to finish. I know that one, Anaya said. She felt almost guilty because her allergies had really eased up. Hardly any sneezing or nose blowing. This morning, when she'd looked in the mirror, she didn't feel the usual pang of disappointment. Her face was hardly puffy at all, and she didn't even sound like she had a cold. Today in class, when she'd answered a question, her voice sounded normal. A couple of kids had actually turned around to see who was talking. And her skin. There were way fewer pimples. Finally, all those gross creams were starting to work, just like Mum promised. She decided she was almost, not quite, but almost, a little bit pretty. It was a lovely warm feeling. She'd even done gym today. For the past 3 years, she'd hated gym. Today, though, she'd done indoor laps and squats and wall push-ups, and hadn't even needed to use her puffer. What was the most amazing was the high jump. Usually she just crashed through the bar, but this time she cleared it, even after Mr. Hilborn raised it twice. It was like she'd finally figured out how to use her legs. They felt strong as they pushed into her into the air. Afterward, in the changing room, Anaya had poked her tights with her thumb. Normally, they were a bit squishy, but today they were hard. Despite everything happening in the world, today had felt like a good day. And now here she was, a seasoned yearbook pro, basking in Teresa's praise and friendship. But her thoughts kept returning to Petra and Seth, like she wished they were hanging out with her too. It had been so strange having Petra in her house last Friday. A couple of times during the visit, she'd almost forgotten they weren't friends anymore, but then she felt guilty and angry all over again. Mostly sad, though, at how she'd lost a best friend. She shut down the computer. Did you guys hear about Mr. Antos? He had a heart attack Friday. Is he going to be okay? Fleetwood asked. Seth had told her about it earlier today. She'd found him sitting alone in the stairwell, his sketchbook closed in his lap, an uneaten sandwich in his hand. They don't know, he's still in the ICU. Those friggin' plants, Teresa murmured, and it was the first time Anaya had seen her look genuinely worried. Normally, all she had to do was raise an eyebrow, say something witty, and scary things evaporated. They're gonna figure it out, she said, wanting to reassure her friend. Your dad know anything about those new ones? Fleetwood asked. She'd already told him how he was studying the seedlings from Petra's water bottles. After he'd transplanted them at the farm, they'd started to grow. Over the weekend, Anaya had seen them inside their terrarium. The ones that looked like little peas, they're becoming vines. Dad thinks they're developing little clusters of berries, and there's these tiny bulges along the stems that have acid in them. Same stuff that burned your dad's fingers? Fleetwood asked. Yeah. And that other one's definitely an aquatic plant. Dad put it in some water. There's a flower bud that's about to open, and they noticed that the water's changed. What do you mean changed? Teresa asked. It's become a tiny bit more acidic, like the plants changed the water's makeup. All these plants come from the same place, Fleetwood said. I told you, it's some kind of bioweapon. We've got to figure out how to kill these things. Teresa's gaze drifted to the window. Not looking forward to going out there. Outside, pollen glittered in the air. Beyond the school field, the black grass grew tall, but the field itself was still green. Anaya said, "It's just so weird there's no black grass on it." Fleetwood said, "Maybe the earth's too packed down or something." "We should take a sample," Anaya said. "I'm serious. If the grass isn't growing there, maybe there's a reason, like a chemical reason in the soil. My dad was telling me about it." "You mean something that stops the grass growing?" Fleetwood asked, interested. "Yeah, maybe it'll help them make herbicide or something." She was still irked that Petra had brought Dad those new plants, and she was not willing to be outdone, especially in the realm of botany. "I'd like to see you ask Mr. Hilborn," said Teresa. "Let's not bother," said Anaya, feeling reckless. "Let's just do it right now." "I'm in," said Fleetwood. "We don't even have a shovel," said Teresa. "I know where to get one," Anaya said. She took them down the hallway to the custodian's closet, which was often ajar after school when they were doing their daily big clean. Inside, Anaya found a shovel and snatched it, as well as a garbage bag. "Criminal mastermind," Teresa whispered to her. Outside on the school field, Anaya headed to the far end. "Here." Eagerly, Fleetwood plunged the shovel into the earth. She opened up the garbage bag wide so he could dump the soil in it. "How much?" he asked. "A little more." The shout reached them from across the field. "Hey, what are you doing?" "It's Hilborn," said Teresa, glancing back over her shoulder and giggling uncontrollably. "We're good," Anaya said. Fleetwood dropped the shovel and Anaya tried to lift the bag, but it was really heavy, so she just dragged it after her. Fleetwood reached down and picked up the bag so they could all run faster. "Hey," Mr. Hilborn called out, but he didn't give chase. Anaya cut through the trees and down to the road. Fleetwood had to pause and have a sneezing fit. Teresa was wheezing, but still giggling. "That was great," she said. "Come on, we'll walk you home." On either side of the road, the black grass grew high from the ditches, making a dark canyon. People couldn't cut this stuff down fast enough. The stalks rustled in the wind, scraping one against another like eerie radio static. "Thanks, guys," Anaya said at the foot of her driveway. "It was awesome," Fleetwood said, heading off. "I wanted to dig a hole in that field for a long time." Anaya dragged the bag up the driveway and left it near the garbage bins. She was surprised to see Dad's pickup and hurried inside. "Hey," she called out, "I brought you something." Dad was in the kitchen, cutting mushrooms and peppers for dinner. She told him how they dug up a soil sample from the school field. "I was thinking there might be hostile alamones stopping the black grass from growing." "Great minds think alike," he said. "I just told my guys to start collecting samples from any clear pastures." He gave her a smile, but he looked preoccupied. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Oh, it's just annoying. The ministry doesn't want me growing the new plant specimens at the farm." "Why not? How are you supposed to know?" "They want their team in Ottawa to handle it." She frowned. "That's stupid. You should be the one doing it, right here, where it grew." Dad shrugged. "They're probably right. They have better equipment out there. I just hope the plants survive the journey." But she got the sense there was something else bothering him, something he wasn't telling her. As they made dinner, he was unusually quiet, and it started to freak her out. She was glad when Mum came through the door, bringing with her the comforting whiff of diesel and leather. She kissed Dad, then sneezed a bunch of times. "It's not bad when I'm in the air," she said, her voice hoarse. "But when I land, wham, it hits me all over again." Mum's nostrils were chafed from all the blowing. Her beautiful, tapered face was puffy around the eyes. Mum took out her phone and started swiping. "You want to see this?" she told Dad. "I took it on my way home." "There's something I need to tell you guys first," Dad said, handing her a glass of red wine. To Anaya's surprise, he handed her a small one too. "What's up?" she asked nervously. "This stays in the house," Dad said. "But the government's declaring a state of emergency in a couple days." The word state of emergency settled like a brick in Anaya's stomach. "So, they think someone definitely bioengineered this stuff?" Mum asked. "That's the current theory," Dad said. "So far, no one's reported sightings of the other two plants, the vine or the water lily, But it's only a matter of time. Mostly, though, the government's worried about the food situation. Anaya had seen the news reports, the videos and social media posts. Everyone had. But she'd always assumed things were under control. Is it really so bad, she asked. Not yet, Dad said. In the southern hemisphere, they aren't as hard hit because their crops were already fully established before the grass showed up. But it still destroyed a lot of their harvest. Up here, it's pretty terrible. If our crops fail, we're looking at a real global shortage. Wheat, corn, rice, barley, soy, all the grains. We have reserves though, right? Mom asked. Months, not years. Remember the drought 2 years ago? Dimly and I remembered stories about a wheat shortage and food prices going up. But to her, food came from supermarkets. And they always looked full. World reserves were low then, Dad said. Less than 20%. That meant if all production stopped, the world had only 7 months of grains total. This would be much worse. Anaya was aware of her mother watching her, concerned. She felt a tremor of fear move through her stomach. She took a sip of her wine and grimaced at its sour taste. We'll be okay here for a while, Dad said. But in poorer countries, if this goes on much longer... Famine? Anaya said. He nodded. Without grains, you don't have livestock feed. And without good grazing pasture, there's nothing else for cattle or pigs or chickens to eat. Geez, Dad, you're making it sound like doomsday. Sorry. He gave Anaya a big hug. She pressed herself against his warm chest. I just didn't want you guys to be as surprised when you heard it on the news. It's gonna be okay. We're gonna figure this out. Okay. You're gonna want to see this even more now. Mom picked up her phone. I took this today over Cordova Island. Anaya leaned in to see it. Mom often shot photos from the cockpit, sometimes interesting clouds, or the light on a mountainside, or a city poking up through low fog. It always amazed Anaya that Mom could take photos and fly the plane. There's that little lake at northeastern end, Mom said. You know the one? More like a marsh, right? Dad said. Anaya knew about Cordova. It was a small island at the top of the Gulf Islands archipelago, and the entire thing was a provincial eco-reserve. No one lived there, no houses or electricity, just a dock and a small cabin that botanists and conservation groups could use when they visited. She'd gone with Dad once when she was little, but she couldn't remember much, except for endless trails and plants that all looked the same and had names that tangled in her head. Mom scrolled to the next picture. So there's this little island in the middle of the marsh, and I bank right over it on my route. All last week, whenever I looked down, I saw the black grass growing on it. But today, look. Mom swiped to the next picture. It was a close-up, a bit blurry. Mom zoomed with her fingers. See that? Anaya frowned. Is that black grass? It was definitely tall grass, but it had a yellow tinge and looked droopy. Those guys do not look healthy to me, Dad remarked. That's what I thought, Mom said. It's dying, Anaya said. Withering away, said Dad. He gave Mom a big hug and a kiss on the mouth. You're an absolute amazing airborne asset. Darling, such sweet talk. This is huge, Dad said. No one's seen this stuff dead yet. Not a single report. So we definitely know it encountered something antagonistic. Might be another plant. Or, he nodded at Anaya, it might be alamones in the soil. I need to get there right away. I'll know more once I have samples. I'll check the other eco-reserves up there too. I can come if you need help, Anaya offered. I'll take Amit. Should only be a few days. She hated the idea of Dad leaving, even for a couple days, with things getting so serious. But she also wanted to be doing something, especially if she could be part of the team that found a way to kill the black grass. Amit was one of Dad's colleagues from the experimental farm, but she knew for a fact he was hard hit with allergies. I can help, she insisted. I'm not even allergic to the stuff. I know, but I bet I can work harder than you guys. Dad smiled. Maybe so, but you're staying here. If you want to help, I know Vicky could use an extra shovel, taking more samples around the island. Anaya sighed. Hey, Dad said, this is good news. Cordova Island might be the break we've been hoping for. How many cans of chickpeas do we need? Petra asked, watching her mother add 2 more to their near overflowing shopping cart. Never hurts to stock up. It was the way her mother lowered her voice just slightly that put Petra on alert. She caught herself dropping her own voice. You mean like for an emergency? Her mum sneezed, then waited till they were past Mrs. Mingo, who was wearing a dust mask and peering over her glasses at organic soups. We're an island. If there are interruptions in services, we're especially vulnerable. Interruptions in services like anything, power, water, food, medicine. A lot of people are off work because of severe allergies and complications. Petra knew from her dad that the little island hospital was already overloaded. For most people, it was like having a really bad cold or the flu. But some people had much more severe reactions, lung infections or life-threatening asthma attacks, and needed to be transferred to Victoria or Vancouver, where the hospitals were also packed. Her mother coughed hard for a few seconds. I just think it's best to be prepared in case things break down. Mom, you're freaking me out. She had a sudden image of her mother standing at the front door with a shotgun, warding off scavengers and starving neighbors. I'm a worst-case scenario kind of person. You sure are, Petra thought. But for the first time, she wondered if it wasn't because her mother was a killjoy, but because she was trying her best to keep people safe. When they'd arrived at the supermarket, the parking lot was mostly empty, as were the sidewalks in town. A few people hurried from their cars into the shop, sneezing, covering their faces. A lot of people wore masks, a very common sight since the pollen started flying. Petra had even seen a few people with those scary heavy-duty things with the canister filter, like in pandemic movies. Alrighty, her mother said, checking the list on her phone. Could you go get some ibuprofen and allergy medicine if by some miracle they have any? I'll meet you at the checkout. Petra headed over to the pharmacy. Shopping with her mother never put her in the best of moods. She never saw her other friends with their mothers. She scowled. And gym class today, what a disaster. Beaten in high jump by Anaya? When had she gotten so fit? That was definitely a sign of the apocalypse. And even worse was when Rachel had said, Anaya's skin has really cleared up. She's pretty. At the pharmacy section, Petra's eyes glided across all the prescription drugs behind the counter. None of them could cure her water allergy. That rainwater had been her one big hope, and now she was too scared to wash with it. Maybe that lab in Vancouver could still make a pure version for her, but so far, she hadn't heard any word back. Dad said every lab was overloaded since the plants had appeared. She noticed Seth Robertson staring at the shelf labeled allergies. It was completely empty except for a single crumpled box of Reactin that had been ripped open and emptied just for that added touch of end-of-the-world frenzy. We can't keep it in stock, Petra heard the mass pharmacist snuffle at Seth. Guardian Drugs might have something. I tried them already. We're supposed to get some more in tomorrow, but they said that yesterday too. Okay, thanks. Seth turned and saw her. He gave her a shy smile and started to leave. With surprise, she realized she didn't want him to. Hey, Seth? He looked startled by the sound of his own name. He wasn't the kind of boy she usually found cute. His body was a bit strange, but he had a good face, and he looked just a tiny bit like Garrity on that TV show, who was a weirdo, but also kind of hot in an intense, crazy way. I didn't think you had allergies, she said. Along with her and Anaya, he was the only other person at school who wasn't sneezing his nose off. Yeah, I'm okay, he said. It's for Mrs. Antos. She's pretty bad. Petra reached into her pocket and passed him a box of Reactin. Here, it's almost full. Seth stared at it, like she'd handed him a bar of gold. "Where'd you get this?" "My dad works at the hospital." "Take it already, before someone sees it and starts a riot." Seth slid it in his hoodie. "Thanks. You just carry around your own stash?" She shrugged. Everyone thought being popular came easy to her, but handing out allergy pills like gummy bears was one way of making sure people kept liking her. Because at the back of her mind was the worry that if her water allergy got worse, her skin would get worse, and she wouldn't be pretty anymore. She loved being pretty, and not just because it made her popular. Being pretty was like armor. It was the only thing between herself and her fears. Fear of people thinking that she was stuck up and icy. Fear of someone stabbing her in the back again. Fear of what the future held for her. "How's Mr. Antos?" she asked Seth. He shook his head. "Not great. I'm going to see him later. His whole family's coming over from Vancouver." From her dad, Petra knew he'd had a heart attack, a bad one, maybe because of damage to his lungs. "I hope he gets better soon." "Thanks, me too." His eyes looked a little red, and she wondered if he'd been crying. She thought it was pretty sweet how much he cared about the Antoses, when he'd only lived with them for a few months. An awkward silence hovered between them. For the life of her, she couldn't think of what to say. This hardly ever happened. "So, you don't have allergies either," he said. "No, well, except the one I got a while ago, water." She almost regretted telling him. It was kind of nice having someone on the island who didn't know about her allergy. But he didn't look at her with pity, only interest. "So, no swimming?" he said. She thought it was strange that the first thing he said, as if he knew how much she missed it. She shook her head. "I used to practically live in the community pool. I did all the lessons and got all the way up to the bronze. I had this plan to become a marine biologist, swimming with sharks and stuff." She stopped herself. She hadn't talked about that, or with such enthusiasm, for a while. And she worried she sounded like a dork. "That really sucks." The way he said it made her feel like he truly meant it. "You must still dream about it. Swimming?" She felt the tiniest bit uncomfortable, like he'd just looked inside her. All the time. He shrugged. "Maybe I'll get to swim again someday." She let out a sigh. "Wow, that'd be great. Anyway, I should get going. My mom's waiting." "See you," he said. "Yeah, bye." She walked off, thinking of the dream she had had last night, how she'd been moving through the water so fast and excited. Seth sat in the hospital waiting room watching TV. The volume was turned low, but he didn't need sound to know what was going on. Farmers staring out at blighted fields, forests of black grass where their crops could have been. Cows and sheep, their faces streaked with blood from trying to graze on spiky grass. A huge bonfire somewhere in the world, somewhere poor, spewing yellowish smoke over a village. A makeshift tent filled with coughing people on stretchers. More headlines scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "New herbicide fails in plant trials, says FDA. World economy shrinks as workforce hit with allergies. Environmental group blames climate change for UN appoints bioterrorism unit to investigate." By now, Seth had heard almost every kind of theory. At least 12 different terrorist groups had said they'd bioengineered the black grass but couldn't prove it, and no one really believed them anyway. Other people were blaming aliens. A religious group was saying it was a sign of the apocalypse and we should all prepare for the end time. Seth's eyes dropped away from the television to Tomas, Mr. Antos's grown-up son. He'd come over from Vancouver with his wife and little boy, who sat on the floor sifting through a box of grimy waiting room toys. Tomas was big like his dad. Seth hadn't talked to him much, or his sister Angela, who'd also come over. Angela was in the ICU now with Mrs. Antos. Only 2 visitors at a time were allowed, and Seth was still waiting his turn. "It's bad in Vancouver too," Tomas said, coughing into his elbow. "Even right downtown, it finds places to grow. Stanley Park is completely overrun." Seth nodded awkwardly. He just met Tomas and Angela for the first time today, and he felt like a fake. They'd smiled kindly at him. They'd shaken his hand and sincerely thanked him for saving their father from the fire. But Seth caught something puzzled in their expressions, like they couldn't quite understand why he was here at all. Why their parents had decided to bring a foster kid into their house. Staring at the television, he wanted something nice to think about, so he angled his thoughts back to Petra and their conversation in the supermarket. He was still amazed she'd even said hi to him. It was about as likely as having a slice of pizza with a supermodel. She had a really pretty mouth. Her lips were so full that even when they were closed, there was this tiny little diamond-shaped gap right in the center. He couldn't help thinking about kissing it, and that made him feel incredibly nervous, as if she'd ever kiss him. But she'd seemed kind of nervous too. Her eyes had darted all over the place. Every time he saw her at school, she was always surrounded by good-looking friends and seemed super confident and composed and, well, terrifying. But maybe that was just practice. He liked how eager she got when she was talking about swimming. He knew what it was like to dream about something you couldn't have. Mrs. Antos and Angela came out of the ICU, and Tomas and his wife went in. Mrs. Antos played with her grandson, and Seth was afraid to ask her how Mr. Antos was doing because Angela was still sniffling. When finally Tomas and his wife returned, Seth said, "Is it okay if I go see him?" The nurse said that was it for today, Tomas replied. "He's pretty out of it anyway." "Oh, sorry, Seth." Back home, he retreated to his room. He heard them all downstairs talking, and the little boy crying, and then someone else crying. He thought it was Mrs. Antos this time, and he didn't feel that he had the right to go down there. He wasn't a real part of the family. He looked out at the fields and saw the new growth of black grass already peeking up from the earth. He got out his sketchbook and realized he hadn't drawn anything in it in over a week. He was about to open it when Mrs. Antos knocked on the door. "Dinner's in a bit," she said. "Why don't you come down?" "You sure?" "Of course." She sat down on the chair. "I'm sorry you didn't get to see him. I know he would have loved to see you." "When's he coming home?" "Not for a while. The doctors say his heart was badly damaged." Seth felt all the breath leaving his lungs until there was nothing left. He counted out the seconds of total emptiness. "Seth," Mrs. Antos said. He looked at her, waited. It was easiest to just wait and listen. "When he comes home, he won't be like he was. He won't be able to take care of this place." "Sure he will," Seth said. "I can help out. You guys taught me a lot of things." "You'd be a wonderful help, but..." He hated the word "but" almost more than anything. It got slipped in anywhere, and it meant something was about to be taken away. Still, he tried. "I can do the heavy stuff Mr. Antos used to do. You guys just tell me what to do. You won't believe how hard I can work." She looked at him, and he knew that look. He'd seen it with the nicer social workers, the ones who probably shouldn't have been social workers because they cared too much, and what they saw hurt them too much. It was sadness and pity, and he hated it. "We're probably going to sell the farm," she said, "so we can buy a condo in Vancouver and be near our kids." Their kids. He watched her, knowing what was coming next, and he made himself leave his body a little bit, so it wouldn't hurt as much. Her eyes were wet. "I'm so sorry, Seth, but we won't be able to take care of you. Gregor's going to need a lot of taking care of. I had a chat with a social worker, and she thinks it's probably best if you're with a family a little younger and a little healthier." "Yeah," he said. "You've been a wonderful addition to our family, and we want you to keep in touch." "Definitely," he said. He was staring at her big hands that could move anything. He should have known in the end they'd just move him too. "Nothing's happening right away," she said. "It'll be at least a few weeks. I'm sorry, Seth. Come down for dinner, okay?" She left him alone. He looked at his sketchbook, still on his lap. Lately, he hadn't felt like he needed to open it. It had been okay to leave things inside. Now he wanted to let them out. All these things he'd seen in dreams. It was weird how they somehow gave him a sense of home. They were still waiting They were still here, waiting for him to come back. He grabbed a pencil and started sketching on a page. His drawings had kept him going, not just for months, but for years. He'd keep drawing up here in his room until it was the Antos family that seemed like a dream, and these sketched images were everything that was real. That night when he fell asleep, he flew again. He saw the ground dropping away beneath him. Trees, yard, house, school, mall, roads. None of it mattered. The landscape he wanted was the sky. He wasn't scared to angle higher, so all he could see was blue. He wasn't afraid to go faster, even when he passed into cloud and felt the mist on his face and heard the whistling in his ears. Cloud, cloud, light, cloud, light. How he loved this part, even the faint throb behind his eyes. The speed was really incredible. He was going somewhere. He hurtled forward. From the corner of his eyes, he saw not outstretched arms, but the shimmer of feathers. End of chapter 6.